You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, everybody. I am very excited to welcome Dr. Camille Preston to Everybody Pulls the Tarp today. Welcome, Dr. Preston. How are you?
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
I am super excited about this conversation. We've been talking about doing this for maybe a couple of months, definitely the last few weeks. To set this up for the audience, Dr. Preston is a leading business psychologist, an expert on all things leadership, productivity, careers, an author, 2 books we'll talk about, and the founder and CEO of AIM Leadership. The 2 books Dr. Preston wrote, Create More Flow and Rewired, How to Work Smarter, Live Better, and Be Purposefully Productive in an Overwired World. Lots of stuff I want to dig into there. But where I want to start is, as we've talked about, I am on this journey to uncover the secrets to success, work ethic, teamwork, and leadership. I'm particularly fascinated, Dr. Preston, by your story, because I know at an early age, you kind of had this epiphany that you were going to be focused on how to achieve your best self. This was something that was really ingrained in you from an early age. Take me back to, I guess, your childhood or whatever that first moment is when you said, I am going to focus on being my best self.
Great question. So, it's interesting. I'm not sure I think there was a mindset that was a part of my family. And even though I was the youngest of 3, we were all pretty close in age. My sister's about 2 years older and my brother's about a year and a half older than her. And it never dawned on me till I was like 4 or 5 that I was actually the youngest. I just assumed I should keep up and be able to roll with the punches and hang out and hold my own. And so I think at a young age, I just started, I don't know, the negative question would be like, how do I not fall behind? And the positive question would be like, what can I learn to keep up or cut corners or edge out my big brother?
That's interesting. For me, I've thought about it a lot, especially the last few years, and I've become obsessed with kind of personal and professional improvement. I read a lot. I take in a lot of content. I try and, every week on this show, we talk to someone who's achieved, a high degree of success. But for me, I think it goes back to a turning point in about a year after I graduated from college. I was laid off from the first job after school. So I was an accounting major at Penn State University. When you're and I've told this story before on the show to some degree. When you're an accounting major at Penn State, like many of the big schools, essentially from the sophomore year on, the big accounting firms around the country essentially are recruiting you nonstop. Come to this firm, come to this firm, come to this firm. And I went to one of the 4 biggest firms in the world. You think everything is good, and then there's an economic downturn in 2009, and everything changes overnight. You're the big recruit a day before, and the next day they say, we don't need you anymore. Pack up everything by midday. And that showed me in that moment that for the rest of my life, I wanted to be what I kind of made up this word. I said, I want to be unlayoffable. And what was clear to me was that there was what I had thought was you go to a good school, you get a good degree, you get a good internship, you get a good job, and you do good work, and everything just kind of works out. But it became clear at that point that that's not the case, that there was more to be done, that if I was sitting still while others were moving, then I was suddenly at a disadvantage. So I've kind of been obsessed with kind of always finding ways to kind of optimize, improve, maximize productivity, do all of these things. One of the things, though, Camille, that I am particularly interested in right now is the impact that technology has on our lives and our success and our productivity, both as professionals and in our personal lives. I know this is something that you've studied a lot, and written about in Rewired. Talk about, the impact of technology from your standpoint.
I will dive into that. Can I just say the experience you had in being laid off is what I think so many people are going through now, where they had jobs that they loved and then COVID hit and jobs disappeared, and they were left in that similar lurch of like, I'm not in control of my destiny. What am I doing? And so I think that idea, self-sufficiency, passion, being a linchpin, as Seth Godin talks about it, being so good at what you do that you have that inner ballast to navigate however happens. I think so many people were caught off guard with the pandemic and were left uncertain and are now asking that same question, which I think is beautiful because it puts us back in the driver's seat of trying to understand, what do I control and how do I take ownership for my best self? And I love that question because it comes with a curiosity and a non-judgment, but also an intrinsic motivation that I feel like will carry so many people that are navigating that now forward. So you're just a little ahead of your time on that one.
Well, I appreciate that. What's interesting, before I let you answer the question, the question on the technology piece, I have to jump in there now. What's interesting is the fact that how people feel like they're in control until you're not in control. Mm-hmm. And not being in control will create an environment for you where you, in my opinion, or at least for me, you want to do everything that you can to possibly control the situation or put yourself in the best probability of success. Maybe there's something to that we can explore. I'm curious your take on the technology.
Can I close that?
Yeah, let's do that.
I think we have a lot of illusions of control. And I think when you try to control your environment, you struggle and you hit up against walls. When you control and master yourself, you, again, are back in the driver's seat. I think that's just such a beautiful distinction for people to kind of take that ownership as we've gone through all the mental health of the pandemic and so forth. But technology, that's a good question because like so many people, I'm sure our perception of technology now in May 2021 is vastly different than our perception of technology in January 2020. We were joking before we got on that we both have relatively young kids. I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and I had designed a life that did not put me in the role as a kindergarten teacher because that was not my highest calling or my best self. I had grown up without a television. Both my parents were educators and had lived tried to kick technology away from my kids. And they've been in remote classes now since March 2020. They've been completely remote and they're thriving. They're doing phenomenally well. My daughter entered kindergarten in a Spanish immersion. 80% of the class is in Spanish. And she went in speaking no Spanish and she just rambles on in Spanish. So like remote technology works in terms of remote education for some kids. I want to acknowledge that we have space and a blessing of having technology and wireless that isn't necessarily for everyone. But so I think how we understand technology is going to be so different as a result of this pandemic. I think my first book, which is almost 10 years old now, it's 10 years old, was really looking at technology before we had that lens of awareness of what it meant to be always on, always connected, what it meant to be, I coined the phrase overwired, where we felt tethered to our devices, that we couldn't separate ourselves. And what's been so fascinating in the pandemic is our technology has been our tether to anchor us in relationships and in work, and so much that's actually been a blessing for a lot of us that have that privilege being able to work remotely. So it's interesting to see how it's evolving. I'm not sure I'm answering your question. Was there?
Well, let's kind of break it up. Let's go like pre-pandemic. Okay, yeah. So somebody like me, busy professional and a busy parent, I felt like technology had almost like overtaken my life, right? Mm-hmm. Like I felt like, the phone was the first thing I checked in the morning, the last thing I checked before I went to bed. Maybe if I wake up in the middle of the night, I might check the phone once or twice too. I was kind of, locked in on email all the time, alerts coming from every, different direction. I felt overwired, I guess, as you might have put it in the book. So pre-pandemic, how can people who are trying to achieve a balance and achieve success in a lot of different things, how can people better wire themselves in that regard from your vantage point?
Great question. So we talked about in the book, if you can imagine a 2x2 matrix, that when you're overwired, you're either in this doing, kind of like frenetic, active, quick motion, or you're done, where you're kind of going, boo, 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 boo. And you would toggle between these intensities of frenetic, manic to checked out. And I encourage people to unwire, to step back, let go of technology, reconnect to the things that matter, reconnect to the things that they need to execute on in their life, reconnect to what a good life is, so that they can then pop up into this fourth quadrant, which is using technology to serve you rather than to drive you. So it's thinking of technology as who's in the driver's seat and who's making the choices around it. I think so many people were unconscious both about how they were using technology, as you described, like unconsciously turning to it in the morning, like waking up in the middle of the night and checking it almost like a pacifier, that we've started to kind of step back from that a little bit. I think where it's so noticing this pattern of doing, done, where you're unconsciously dialed in to the technology and then stepping back, unplugging from it and reconnecting to kind of what I would consider life force or source or purpose or vision or what it is you want to create in the world, and then pulling it together so that it's working in a healthy, effective way for folks. I think what's interesting about the pandemic is we had a lot of artificial structures. We had a lot of containers. We left our home and we went to the workplace, and then we left our workplace and maybe saw friends, and then we left the friends and we came back to our home, and everything was separate. And then we all came home. For many of us, we were home like all the time. And things started to blur, both what we did in our home, but then when we used technology and what that looked like. I'll share that I love what I do. It feeds me, it lights me up. I'm a better person when I'm doing the work that I love. And so when the pandemic hit, my husband had just started a new job. He was trying to establish himself. He was trying to get a lay of the land. And so I ended up getting up from working from 3 a.m. till 9 a.m. And then I was teaching miserably, failing left, right, and center during the day. And then I would pass the kids back to him about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I would go back to work. And that actually, I'm never going to sign up to be a kindergarten teacher. That's, I take my hat off. I have such regard for our educators, but I did like the separation of life in those quadrants, how it shifted. And I think we now in this blurred world need to really be intentional with those boundaries that can distract us from being present with the things we really want, whether it's the work we need to do or the kids.
Well, I think, Camille, one of the things for me, a mentor told me early in my career that if you think about it as work-life balance, this was many years ago. If you think about it as work-life balance, you're going to really struggle. If you think about it as work-life integration, you're going to achieve a much happier, more successful state, in this person's opinion. And what he meant was, if the people you work with are people that you enjoy spending time with out of work, and if you expose your kids to the work you do and why the work you do is important, then that has a benefit. And if you think about it through the lens of, well, hey, maybe instead of taking a 3-day vacation, we could take a 5-day vacation if I can do a little bit of work and use some of the technology, even at the time back then, that was available to me to be able to kind of balance, to integrate the two things, then you can do a lot more. And you kind of 1 + 1 becomes 3 or 4 or 5. And I think that theory of the work-life integration for me was tested in this environment because there was so much more kind of brought into the equation in such a quick period of time.
I love it. What I'm hearing you say is having agility to turn it on and turn it off. When you can have that agility and actually turn it off, it opens up new possibilities and new ways of engaging.
How does that impact? I know you study and talk about flow a lot and this concept of flow. And we've had coaches on this show who talk about the concept of flow as it pertains to sport and gymnastics. And when you're in that flow, it's like some unique state that is difficult to achieve. Talk about flow from a standpoint of your world as a business psychologist, and how do people achieve flow? What is flow, and what's the benefit?
So there's a statistic that says in flow, you're 5 times as productive and up to 7 times as creative. I think I got that right. Flow is magnificent. It feels just phenomenal. It's like when you're firing in all cylinders and ideas are coming together. It's, that the Reese's commercial where chocolate came with peanut butter and it was like, eureka. The thing that's interesting, if people listen to the sports examples of flow, is it doesn't really matter where you experience flow. The more you experience flow, the easier it is to get into the state of flow. And so there's a neurological pattern that gets wired in that helps us understand what is flow in our bodies, and it triggers it. So If I go running in the morning, I'm in this stage of life where I go running and my kids are on their bikes. And it's a really just like sweet moment because we have conversations that you wouldn't normally have. And, we're watching the geese have their babies and the daffodils are in bloom. And if I can get into flow running with my kids and just lose myself in the conversation and the space and the energy, it increases the likelihood that I'll get into flow in work. And so we run these patterns. And if we can distill what those patterns are, then we can start to cross contextualize, bring a pattern from one flow state to another flow state. And if you go back in time, a lot of the kind of magnificent contributions that people have made from across industries, whether it's architecture or music or design or engineering, they often have multiple ways of tapping into flow. A very dear friend is Ivy Ross, who runs hardware design at Google, and her music is phenomenal. Her artwork is phenomenal. She does so many different things that make bringing flow into her workplace just who she is. Can I share the 5 stages, how we think about it?
Yeah, please.
So what we know is that flow is not an on or off state. We know that flow has certain precursors. So if you can identify and understand your precursors and then restructure your environment to maximize those precursors, you can increase the likelihood of getting into flow more often. And so we think of the first phase as preparation. Where am I? Where do I need to go? What are the outcomes? Like, how do I start to lock into that end state and think about all the components of it? The second state, and so for athletes, this is when they visualize themselves winning the gold at the Olympics. This is when people, we live in Cambridge, the head of the Charles, crossing the line as the elite rowing team, beginning with the end and getting really clear on that and what needs to happen to go into it. The second stage is where we do purposeful struggle. It's the metaphor of going to the gym and lifting the heavy weights and building the muscles and tearing the muscles and jamming new information into your brain. And you have to go through purposeful struggle to get to that level of mastery, right? It's learning the skills, it's training your body, it's developing that pattern recognition. But you can't struggle your way into flow. You actually have to step back. And we call it going into release, where you step back, you get perspective, you go do something completely different. And it's in that completely different place that ideas come together, that the chocolate meets the peanut butter, and we have these eureka moments. Years ago, I had a client tell me, he said, Camille, I got to tell you, I just installed a whiteboard in my shower. And the visual was just I don't know where this is going. He said, I just have the biggest brainstorms in the shower. I just need to be able to capture things when I'm in the shower. And so he's writing down those ideas, but it makes sense because he's physically changed his state. He's stepped away from this traditional environment. He's relaxing and he's got all this energy flowing. And so I started listening to this. And when I'm really struggling on something meaty, I will load the information in. I will do the purposeful struggle. I'll think about all the components. I'll think about all the dynamics. And then I'll go for a run, or I'll get on the yoga mat, or I'll go sit in the hot tub. So I'm changing my physical state. I'm releasing, but I always have to have something close by because I want to be able to capture those brainchilds as they come. And we pop into flow. You want to seize it. You want to be able to own it, take advantage of it. And so this is where it's also hard in COVID because we had a lot more, those of us with kids had a lot more responsibilities than we might have normally had. And so it requires having a well-honed collaboration with your partner to be able to say, hey, listen, I'm firing on all cylinders. Can you catch the kids? Can you do this? And carving out that space. And so that's part of the reason why I took the mornings, was because that's my biological prime time. That's when I wrote my dissertation, when I've written books, it's when it fires. So understanding that you get into that state of flow. The interesting thing is you can cycle preparation, purposeful struggle, preparation, release. You can cycle back and forth. Once you go into flow, there's kind of no coming backwards. You can't go back in the circle. You actually have to go all the way around into what we think of as recovery. Feels a little bit like a hangover. You've left it all on the table. You're spent. You got to shift gears. You got to recover. You got to give yourself space and then come back into the cycle of preparation. But it's if people haven't experienced it, it is so amazing.
It's so fascinating. You talked about, you said biological prime time. This is something that I've kind of discovered or kind of accidentally fell into. I realized in college that when most people were sleeping was when I actually did my best work. I mean, It was just a matter of I had to find, enough days each week to get up super, super early to get started and do my best work. And today it's no different. I'll find that there are days, I might get up at 4 o'clock in the morning voluntarily just because I know that there's a task I want to complete, or, those hours in the morning are when I can be the most creative. Like, as you said, the most focused. It's interesting. I never heard it referred to as a biological prime time.
But so just to give you an extra dose of credit there, what happened to you at the layoff was figuring out where your passion is and figuring out what you love and figuring out what's going to fire you up. And so I think if there are listeners who are thinking, there's nothing I want to do to get me out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, then I might invite them into a curiosity about what they would want to get up for. What is it that they are excited about? Because I think that's another trend that we're seeing massively now is people saying, having navigated the past 14, 18 months, people really want to like what they do and they want to feel like they're having an impact in the world. And you and I have both learned that. I think we're pretty dialed in, but if that's not you, I think that's a really worthy journey.
Well, I don't know if I'm dialed in. I'm trying to get dialed in, Camille, but speaking of making an impact. So, I have this mantra. This show is called Everybody Pulls the Tarp, and it's all based upon a philosophy that great teams, great organizations are powered by individuals who do the unexpected things. They do things that are outside the boundaries of their job description. And I learned this early in my career in my first internship when, I thought I was going to learn the front office of sports, and they told me to, start pulling the tarp and help the grounds crew because they needed an extra hand. And I did all kinds of things, odd jobs. I painted offices. I drove players to their condos. I drove their wives to the condos. I went and picked up food. I parked cars. I did whatever it took. And, as I moved on in my career, which wasn't in sports, I said, that experience taught me something. That experience taught me that, the best way to contribute is to do whatever is needed in the moment for the team, the community, what have you. And I think it's been a part of my work ethic since. From a work ethic standpoint, when you think about like what we're doing in the workplace these days, right? We're working in a far different way than we ever have. I know well-being at work is something that you're super passionate about. How much responsibility for the well-being at work is on the individual versus the business, the organization, the team, the culture? I'm curious about that.
It's a good question. I love the metaphor of everybody pulls the tarp because it's a mindset, it's a value system, it's a culture, it's kind of the foundation of whether it's your family or your workplace, what have you. So I think it's a brilliant concept, and it's a wonderful almost lens of perspective to figure out, is this person a good fit? As it relates to well-being at work, I think that's a really complicated question. And so many clients are grappling with this, the leaders, as they think about this reentry. It's complex because I think people have navigated adversity. I think there's two sides of the coin. People have done things that they never thought they were able to do in the past 14, 18 months of going deep. Everybody pulls the tarp, the being a preschool teacher and straight through to helping some of my hospital clients go remote in 3 days. So I think it's part of the culture of how you operate. When it comes to well-being, I think organizations that have a culture of well-being and preserving that and investing in that and encouraging people to take care of themselves and then leading by example about what that looks like, I think they're going to find the flywheel go. So yes, it's an individual's responsibility. It's also an organizational cultural value. And I think the part that I sit with that I think is a little bit more complex or has some tension is that some people are finding themselves in not well places right now. And there shouldn't be any judgment. And I think that's where companies need to come in and really support people in finding the resources, making the meaning and navigating. And many people, I think, will look back at this year and describe it as a PTSD moment. Like, I was stuck in my house with these people for this long. And then you'll see other people who will think of it as a post-traumatic growth experience. And the difference between PTSD and PTG is a very small shift, but it's the mindset. And one of my very dear friends in April 2020 said, Camille, I'm just making COVID lemonade, left, right, and center. She's a woman who's navigated a lot of adversity in her life. And she introduced me to this concept of COVID lemonade, which is, what are the things that you are doing now that wouldn't have been possible? Was it not for the pandemic. And that's an example of the mindset that goes from PTSD to PTG. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I've heard someone call it the optimistic cherry on top. You say whatever you say whatever you're going through, but I get to do this. I have a good friend who he took the word have out of his vocabulary and replaced it with get. So instead of I have to, it's I get to. And even for things that seem menial or things that seem kind of that disgruntle you, instead of I have to, park a mile away from the store and walk, it's I get to park a mile away from the store and walk. Very
Can I share one
different.
thing on that?
Sure.
So little people in our lives, and all of a sudden living under the same roof. COVID has been absolutely magnificent in teaching my kids responsibility, and I wouldn't have had the time and the autonomy or like the space to do it. But I remember one day last spring just being at my wit's end, and everybody got zones. My husband took the bathrooms, I took the kitchen, my daughter took the living room and the dining room, and my son took the schoolroom and the foyer. And they were just, everybody's responsible for their zones. And it was born out of mommy, at her wit's end, but it created this amazing experience that now like people are like, hey, you're leaving stuff in my zone. It's like our house is phenomenal, but that's a great COVID lemonade that we would never have had. So I think there's a lot of those out there. It's like everybody pulls the tarp, everybody cleans the house. I don't know what you call it.
There's an example everywhere, right? Where we could go to that. Camille, before we wrap up, I want to kind of segue from in this COVID environment, right? I mean, our family is always our number one team, but never more so than during this pandemic. You described there, essentially the family working as a team. When you think about your work and the research that you've done and what you teach your clients, what are some, just easy tips for people to become more resilient, both as an individual and as a unit? How can people achieve more resiliency? Be knocked down less by some of the things that get in our way?
It's a great question. And maybe we can link in the show notes some of the resources on our website at AIM Leadership that talk about how to tactically do that. I'm increasingly entrenched in the belief of vulnerability, that when we are authentic and vulnerable and comfortable sharing the goods, the bads, the uglies, we build the rapport in the relationship, but we also let go of a weight or an assumption that we should be a certain way. So I'm really struck that deepening the relationship, bringing yourself to the table in the conversation with authenticity, deepening that relationship actually shifts how people engage and opens them to start to say, having some of those mindset conversations, having some more authentic conversations that will then rise all the boats. But I think it comes back to relationship and authenticity and bringing your full self to the table. I'm curious, how do you answer that?
Well, one of the things through this journey that's been, I think, one of the most prevalent, and for me, one of the most, I guess, noticeable and surprising is when I've talked to a lot of the Olympians who've won a lot of gold medals, professional athletes who've achieved a lot of success, best-selling authors, what's been really true in all those conversations is not just that they failed, right? Okay, and how many times they failed on their road to success and that they still fail, right? Like success is not like an end state. It's just it's kind of a moment in time and then you go back to failing and then you try and get some success again. It's not that they failed. It was how passionate they were about talking about their failures and how, for some of them, how frustrated they are that most on the outside, and they perceive that most on the outside don't see them as having had any failures. So an example, right? An Olympic figure skater or an Olympic gymnast, if they win the gold and they land the jump or land the triple axel, everyone around the world thinks that they achieved perfection. But what nobody around the world necessarily saw was the 10,000 times that they tried it and the 500 times that they fell and the bruises that are on their legs and the time that they tore a ligament and needed to rehabilitation. What's been amazing to me is to see the passion and vigor with which elite performers who achieved elite level of success want to talk about the failure and how they perceive that most outsiders don't think that they fail and how proud they are to share their failures, which I think speaks to a little bit what you described there in terms of the vulnerability.
Yeah, like when you bring yourself to the table and then two things happen. One is when they can say, I failed this many times, it humanizes them and it humanizes the relationship. But then they're able to be they engage in a different way, and then we can learn at different levels. I think one of the risk factors is when we come fully packaged with this like veneer of having it all together. It's kind of the sloppy moments that make us human, that make us connected, that help us grow and learn. And then my failure helps you not get there, right? Like, so there's a stacking that comes with that vulnerability, and a reminder that we are all on this journey to find out what is our passion, what is our best self, and how can we constantly be coming in a better shape and form towards that best self.
Well, our journey to our best self surely is a journey. A songwriter, Camille, who has written 18 number one hits, once told me it took me about 8 years to become an overnight success. And I think that resonates here in our conversation as we think about failure, we think about adversity, vulnerability, and achieving our best self. Camille, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've had so much fun chatting with you. We'll connect some resources in the show notes so that folks can continue their journey and digging into some of your research and insights. Thank you so much for joining Everybody Pulls the Tarp.
Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Instagram at AndrewMoses123 and sign up for my monthly email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today is a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.